Good morning, everybody. 10 o'clock, so we will get started. Welcome to our business rates and lease advisory spring update in March 2022. Just so you're aware, you can put some questions as we go along in the chat box, and there's also going to be some handouts available towards the end of the session. So first of all, before we get started, in case you're not sure, I'll just go through who Vickery Holman are. So we're property consultants in the West Country, and we are split into 4 different sectors: building surveying, agency, property management, and general practice surveying. And then those are split into 4 different areas: valuation, development services, lease advisory, and business rates consultancy. So an introduction to us. My name's Amy. I'm a chartered general practice surveyor working in the Bristol and Exeter offices. I do landlord and tenant work and business rates consultancy. Worked at VH for 3.5 years, and I became head of lease advisory back in October 2021.
And I'm Jordan. I am also a chartered general practice surveyor, and I work between our Truro and Plymouth offices. I also do both business rates consultancy and landlord and tenant work, and I've been with Vickery Holman for 2.5 years. I also recently became head of business rates consultancy. So today, Amy and I are going to talk you through a case study, during which we will walk you through a timeline from early 2021 until the present day. We have put this together by drawing on the details of a couple of jobs we have worked on recently. And our aim is that through this case study, we can talk to you about some of the key issues that COVID-19 caused in the contractual relationships between landlords and tenants, and the impact it had on the lease renewal process. This case study will enable us to discuss some of the potential issues that have been and may continue to be faced by landlords and tenants. The COVID-19 had and continues to have, of course, quite an impact on business rates, which affect landlords and tenants alike. We're also therefore going to touch upon some of the grants and reliefs which were introduced to support occupiers of commercial property during the pandemic, and then we will discuss the grants and reliefs that will be available in the coming financial year. We will also talk about some of the changes to the business rate system that were introduced in the autumn budget, as well as some of the more recent developments in the proposals to reform the system. We will then finish by talking you through some of the advice we can offer in relation to business rates more generally, especially if you or a client find yourself with an empty property or a property in need of redevelopment. So this brings us to our case study, which is based upon a retail premises located in a mid-Devon town. The property is approximately 600 square feet, and the rent is £18,000. This rent was set in 2016. The rateable value is £15,000. So our timeline begins in 2021, in the period from January to March.
Thank you, Dawn. Yeah, if you could cast your minds back to just over a year ago, we were in a lockdown again for around 3 months. So non-essential shops like the one in the case study had to close, although they could operate click and collect and online services. This tenant was able to do that, offering click and collect and an online business, which was able to sustain a reasonable income, but obviously much smaller than they would have had they been fully open.
So January last year, in fact, saw the Prime Minister announcing that all retail, hospitality and leisure businesses would have to close until at least February half term. On Tuesday, the 5th of January, the government therefore announced a new one-off top-up grant payment for affected businesses worth up to £9,000 per property to help them through to the spring. The cash was provided on a per-property basis to support businesses through the restrictions. As our example tenant had to close and could not provide their usual in-person service, they received a one-off payment of £4,000, as the rateable value of the property was below £15,000. The tenant was therefore able to use this payment in part to pay their rent.
Also in this period, the tenant approached the landlord and asked for a rent-free period of around 3 months due to this closure. The landlord obviously wasn't too happy to lose their entire income for this length of time, and they suggested that they cut the rent 30% of the normal whilst the shop was closed. Between the income generated from the online and click and collect service and the business rates grant received, as Jordan's mentioned, the tenant reluctantly agreed to continue to pay 30%. It's important to note this reduction of rent was not intended to be paid back. Another landlord in another situation may have insisted on deferment of the rent to pay back when the shop was at normal function again.
So our timeline now moves to the period between April 2021 and August 2021.
By this time, some lockdown restrictions had ended and shops like this were able to open again, with possibly some restrictions with numbers in the shop, and the tenant agreed to start paying full rent.
Whilst the tenant was paying full rent, they were still enjoying a reduction in their business rates. From the beginning of April last year to the end of June last year, the expanded retail discount continued to apply. Eligible properties, including our example property, received a 100% discount and therefore paid no business rates. From the 1st of July 2021, the retail discount continued, but at a reduced level of 66% until the end of the financial year. This therefore applies to all eligible retail, hospitality and leisure properties until the end of this month.
Moving on, looking at September last year to around about the present day. During this time, the lease expired, let's say in September 2021. The tenant hasn't mentioned it by this point, and the landlord is not inclined to push the matter. If you cast your minds back to September, there was an increase in COVID infections, and there was a lot of concern over what might happen this winter with further restrictions, lockdowns, etc. So the lease is inside the Landlord and Tenant Act 1954. So the tenant remains in occupation, has security of tenure, and pays the same rent of £18,000 per annum. Moving forward to around now, the tenant notices the lease has expired and asks for a new lease. They do believe, however, that retail rents have fallen in the area over the last few years, and so they say they'll only sign a new lease with a rent reduction. So finally, we're looking slightly into the future now, from around now or April to around August. So the landlord now instructs a surveyor to conduct the lease renewal on their behalf. A review of the rents does reveal that there has been a reduction for that size of shop in that area. The surveyor suggests that the solicitor for the landlord serves a Section 25 notice on the tenant. This will formally bring the tenancy to an end in 6 months' time, so let's say the 10th of August. The notice is served at a proposed rent of £16,000 per annum for a 5-year lease, tenant break in year 3. So a small reduction in rent, relatively short lease. Through some negotiation, a rent is agreed of a stepped nature, which would be £12,000 in year 1, £14,000 in year 2, and then £16,000 for years 3 to 5. So all agreed, the new lease is drawn up to start the day after the Section 25 notice and is signed by both parties.
Thank you, Amy. So I'd now just like to take a moment to talk you through the ongoing relief which will be available from April of this year, as well as some of the forthcoming potential changes to the business rate system. From the 1st of April, ongoing relief will still be available under the Retail, Hospitality and Leisure Business Rates Relief Scheme. This applies not only to traditional retail premises, such as our example shop, but to a wide range of properties which are used for the sale of goods to visiting members of the public. So this could be markets or garden centres or petrol stations, for example. It will also apply to properties which provide services to visiting members of the public. So this could be laundrettes, tool hire premises, hairdressers, and funeral directors. And it also applies to pubs, bars, coffee shops, cinemas, and those properties which are used for the provision of sport and leisure to visiting members of the public. This scheme will provide eligible occupied properties with a 50% relief up to a cash limit of £110,000 per business. This will, of course, be a welcome ongoing relief for many business owners. As too will be the recent approval by the House of Commons of the freezing of the business rates multipliers for another year until the end of 2023. The business rates multipliers are set by central government each year and are used to calculate business rates liability. This approval therefore means that, assuming all property facts remain unchanged, business rates bills should not increase in the coming financial year. This gives some certainty until the beginning of the new rating list in April 2023. A draft rating list is going to be published by the Valuation Office on the 31st of December 2022, which will give businesses a chance to review their upcoming rateable values in advance of the new list. A one-off Omicron hospitality and leisure grant was also made available to hospitality, leisure and accommodation businesses in January of this year. This is intended to support hospitality, leisure and accommodation businesses specifically, with one-off grants available of up to £6,000. Applications for this must be made by the 18th of March and all monies must be paid by the 31st of March. Councils should have contacted eligible businesses in January of this year. As I'm sure you're aware, various changes to the business rate system were proposed by the Chancellor in last year's budget, and on the 30th of November 2021, the government launched a 12-week technical consultation on how it intended to implement these changes. This invited respondents to the consultation to complete an online survey with their views. This closed on the 22nd of February, and the feedback is currently being analysed by government. We're looking forward to receiving the results of this and analysing the outcomes, and finding out in particular how the government intends to implement more frequent revaluations. The autumn budget also saw the government committing to a consultation on introducing an online sales tax. This follows concern outlined in the Fundamental Review of Business Rates that businesses that substantially operate online pay comparatively less in business rates than their bricks and mortar competitors. An early stage consultation on this matter is currently live, and you can submit your views online until the 20th of May. If implemented, an online sales tax could see business rates reduced for high street retailers. So as you can see, there is a great deal of change afoot, and we will of course be on hand to advise on the developments as and when they come.
Thank you, Jordan. So that case study was just one course of events. There could have been many other ways that could have gone. So I'm just taking you through a couple of them. The first of all is the lack of a Section 26 notice. This is served from the tenant to the landlord and means that the tenant wants to have a new lease. The tenant, if properly advised, could have served a Section 26 notice 12 months, up to 12 months before the expiry of the lease in September 2021. And this would have got the ball rolling on negotiations. As a lower rent was expected than the passing, this would have meant that it would have pushed the landlord to have agreed maybe a slightly lower rent from an earlier point. The landlord, although initially not triggering the renewal, was able to have about 11 months of a higher rent than market, although an interim rent application to the court could have been processed, which would have given the tenants the opportunity to reduce their rent outgoings from September 2021. This move is fairly rarely taken, and it would have been an easier option just to have served the Section 26 and sorted negotiations a little earlier. In normal conditions, we would recommend that both tenants and landlords are aware of their lease expiry dates and that conversations are started a good 6 months before the expiry. This allows time to agree new terms with or without the serving of either Section 25 or 26 notices. There are some other scenarios here, such as the non-payment of rent during the pandemic, for which the highly anticipated rent arrears arbitration service, which is due to open in a couple of weeks this month, is designed to bring clarity and ensure that the payment of what could be probably into the millions of pounds of rent arrears across the country for many landlord and tenant combinations. Another situation with looking at our case study is that the tenant, feeling the need to reduce their own risk, takes a more flexible lease with different terms to perhaps the standard ones that we are used to. This could include the presence of an upward or downward rent review, which up until now has been very rare, but we have started to see it in a couple of lease negotiations. Also an RPI-linked rent review, an earlier break option, or even a rolling break option, perhaps after 18 months. And also the inclusion of pandemic clauses within leases, which provide for the reduction or suspension of rent should the premises have to shut or be prevented trading due to future pandemics.
Thank you, Amy. So I'm just going to talk you through some of the alternative outcomes now in terms of business rates. So as we have seen in many cases as an unfortunate result of the COVID-19 pandemic, another outcome here could have been the failure of the tenant's business, which may have forced them to take the decision to close the shop and vacate the premises. This would have seen the business rates liability return to the landlord. Had this been the case, we would have advised the landlord, firstly, to review their business rates assessment in full. So in the case of this property, which is a retail unit, errors are most frequently found in the floor area calculations. So by inspecting and measuring the property, we would be able to advise the landlord if their rateable value was based on the correct floor areas. If an error was found, we would submit a detailed check to the valuation office, including floor plans, via the government gateway on the landlord's behalf. This check would be intended to rectify the error and would secure a reduction in the rateable value, which would in turn reduce the business rates liability of that landlord. There might also be the opportunity to challenge the valuation if, following our inspection and research, we felt that the rate per square metre applied in the valuation of the property was excessive. The check and challenge process could, of course, also have been carried out on behalf of the tenant whilst they were in occupation of the property. So another consideration here is that when a property becomes empty, empty property relief applies for 3 months only, or 6 months in the case of industrial units. After this time, full rates become payable. So if, as in our example, a landlord finds themselves with an empty retail unit, after the 3 months exemption period, they would become liable to pay the business rates in full. We can offer a solution to this, which can be implemented indefinitely until such time as a property can be reoccupied and allows the liable occupier to enjoy additional periods of empty rates relief. Alternatively, finding themselves with a vacant property, the landlord might also have decided to redevelop their property, perhaps a change of use from retail to residential, for example. Interestingly, many of the lease renewals we have negotiated recently have involved the surrender of upper floors of retail units by the tenant for redevelopment or conversion to residential by the landlord. Where a property is undergoing significant redevelopment or refurbishment, it may be possible to have it temporarily removed from the rating list whilst works are ongoing. We would have advised this landlord if the type of works they had planned would constitute the type of works required to remove the property from the rating list, and if so, we would submit a detailed check with extensive supporting evidence on their behalf, and we would negotiate with the VOA on their behalf to achieve the best possible savings.
Thank you, Jordan. Okay, that brings us to the end of our talk. I hope we've been able to set out some of the issues for both landlords and tenants that have been faced over the last 18 months within leases, landlord and tenant, and business rates, reliefs, and how the rateable value can be changed or suspended in different circumstances. We've also had a brief look at what might lie ahead for the rest of the year. So I will open the floor to questions, and also if you have a look at the handouts, there's a couple of documents there. There's our lease advisory and business rates flyers, our very recent GPS newsletter, which has updates from all the services, valuation, development services, and obviously lease advisory and business rates, and also a specific business rates newsletter, which is also very new and up to date. So please have a look at that. Let us know if you have any questions on any of the services we provide. More than happy to help with that. No questions at the moment. Okay, I won't hang on too long if there's no other questions. So as I said, have a look at the handouts. This is being recorded as well, so you'll be able to see this on YouTube, I think, and also it will be sent out to all the attendees who weren't able to watch it live. So in that case, thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Jordan, as well, for attending, and we hope to see you all soon. We've got a couple of other webinars and real life events as well nowadays starting up, so hopefully we'll see you at one of those very soon. So thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you.